In the spring of 1989, the Carvina Corporation released a curious game, whose dissemination among American students that fall was swift and furious, though its popularity was ultimately short-lived. The game was Killswitch. On the surface, it was a variant on the mystery or horror survival game, a precursor to the Myst and Silent Hill franchises. The narrative showed the complexity for which Carvina was known, though the graphics were monochrome, vague gray and white shapes against a black background. Slow, meaty versions of Czech folk songs play throughout. Players would choose between two avatars, an invisible demon named Gast or a visible human woman, Porto. Play as Gast was considerably more difficult, due to his total invisibility, and players were highly liable to restart the game as Porto after the first level, in which it was impossible to gauge jumps or aim. However, Gast was clearly the more powerful character. He had fire breath and a cold steam attack. But as it was above the skill level of most players to keep track of where a fire-breathing, poison-dispensing invisible imp was on their screens once the fire and steam had run out, Porto became more or less the default. Porto's singular ability was seemingly random growth. She expanded and contracted in size throughout the game. A Kansas engineering grad claimed to have figured out the pattern involved, but for reasons which will become obvious, his work was lost. Porto awakens in the dark with wounds in her elbows. Confused, seeking a way out, she ascends through the levels of a coal mine in which it is slowly revealed that she was once an employee. Investigating its collapse and beset on all sides by demons similar to Gast, as well as dead foremen, coal golems, and demonic inspectors from the SomeOrdinaryGamers Corporation, whose boxy bodies were clothed in red, the only color in the game. The environment, though primitive, becomes genuinely uncanny as players progress. There are no bosses in any real sense. Porto must simply move physically through tunnel to reach subsequent levels, with her size varying wildly through interlevel spaces. The story that emerges through Porto's discovery of magnetic tapes, files, mutated factory workers who were once her friends, and deciphering an impressively complex code inscribed on a series of iron axes players must collect. This portion of the game was almost laughably complex and defeated many players until Porto 881 posted the cipher to a Columbia BBS. Attempts to contact this player have been unsuccessful, but due to the username no longer being available on any known service, well, the point is, the foremen, who were under pressure to increase coal production, began to falsify reports of malfunctions and worker malfeasance in order to excuse low output, which incited the SomeOrdinaryGamers inspection. Officials were dispatched, one for each miner, and an extraordinary story of torture unfolds with fuzzy and indistinct graphics of red-coated men standing over workers, inserting small knives into their joints whenever production slowed. Admittedly, this is not a very subtle critique of Soviet-era industrial tactics, and as the town of Carvina itself was devastated by the departure of the coal industry, more than one thesis has interpreted Killswitch as a political screed. After solving the axe code, Porto finds and assembles a tape recorder, on which a male voice tells her that the fires of the earth had risen up in their defense and flowed into the hearts of the decrepit, pre-revolution equipment they used and wakened them to avenge the workers. Now, it's generally assumed that the fires of the earth are demons like Gast, coal fumes and gassy bodies inhibiting the old machines. The machines themselves are so big that the graphics elect to only show 2 or 3 gear teeth or a conveyor belt rather than the entire apparatus. The machines drove the inspectors mad, and they disappeared in the caverns with their knives, only to emerge to plague Porto, of course. The workers were often crushed and mangled in the onslaught of machines who were neither graceful nor discriminating. Porto herself was knocked into a deep chasm by a grease-stricken engine, and her fluctuating size, if it is real and not imagined, is implied to be the result of poisonous fumes inhaled there. What follows is the most cryptic and intuitive part of the game, and there is no logical reason to proceed in the correct way. And again, it was Porto 881 who came to the rescue of the fledgling Killswitch community. In the chamber behind the tape recorder is his great furnace where coal was once rendered into coke. There are no clues as to what she is intended to do in this room at all. Players attempted nearly everything from immolating herself to continuing the process of making coal as if the machines had never risen up. Porto 881 hit upon the solution and posted it to the Columbia boards. See, if Porto ingests the raw coke, she'll find her body under control, and she can go to fight her way out of the final levels of the mine, which are impassable in her giant state, clutching the tape containing this extraordinary story. However, as she crawls through the final tunnel to emerge above ground, the screen goes suddenly white. Killswitch, by design, deletes itself upon player completion of the game, and it is not recoverable by any means. All traces of it are removed from the user's computer. The game can't be copied. For all intents and purposes, it exists only for those playing it, and then it ceases to be entirely. One can't replay it, unlocking further secrets or narrative pathways. One cannot allow another to play it, and perhaps most importantly, it's impossible to experience the game all the way to the end as both Porto and Gast. Predictably, player outcry was enormous. Several routes to solve the problem were pursued with no real efficiency. The first and most common was to simply buy more copies of the game, but Carvina Corp released only 5,000 copies, and they refused to press further editions. The following is an excerpt from their May 1990 press release. Killswitch was designed to be a unique playing experience. Like reality, it is unrepeatable, unretrievable, and illogical. One might even say ineffable. Death is final. Death is complete. The fates of Porto and her beloved Gast are as unknowable as our own. It is a desire of Carvina Corporation that this be so, and we ask our customers to respect that desire. Rest assured, Carvina will continue to provide the highest quality of games to the West, and that Killswitch is merely one among our many wonders. This didn't have the intended effect. The word beloved piqued the interest of committed, even obsessive players, as Gast is not present in any portion of Porto's narrative. A rush to find the remaining copies of the game ensued, with the intent of playing as Gast and discovering the meaning of Carvina's cryptic word. The most popular theory was that Gast would at some point become the fumes inhaled by Porto, changing her size and beginning her adventure. Some thought this was wishful thinking, that if only Gast's early levels were passable, one would somehow be able to play as both simultaneously. However, by this time no further copies appeared to be available in retail outlets. Players who had not yet completed the game attempted Gast levels frequently, but the difficulty of actually playing this enigmatic avatar persisted, and no player has ever claimed to have finished the game as Gast. One by one, the lure of Porto's lost, unearthly world drew them back to her, and one by one they were compelled towards the finality of the vast white screen. To find any copy usable today is an almost unfathomably rare occurrence. A still shrink-wrapped copy was sold at auction in 2005 for $733,000 to Yamamoto Ryuichi of Tokyo. Now, it's entirely possible that Yamamoto's is the last remaining copy of the game. Knowing this, Yamamoto had intended to open his play to all enthusiasts, filming and uploading his progress. However, to date, the only film which has ever surfaced is a 1 minute and 45-second clip of a haggard Yamamoto at his computer, the avatar choice screen visible over his right shoulder. Yamamoto, though, is crying. Oh, that was quite an interesting creepypasta. Ladies and gentlemen, what we just listened to was Killswitch. Yes, Killswitch. No, not the cover-based shooter that was released on the PS2 or the Game Boy Advance, but rather an interesting game crafted by the minds of Carvina Corporation. Now, Carvina Corporation apparently has a Twitter and a YouTube channel, but I don't think it's actually a real corporation. In fact, a lot of this game seems to be just a hoax, something fictitious in nature, but unlike everything else, I've tried Googling around and I could never get a straight answer. There are some people who claim to say that Killswitch was in fact a real game that was created, coming straight out of the Russian Federation, and then, well, not the Russian Federation at the time, but then there are people who are saying that this is completely false, and the thing is that I can't confirm it. If this was to exist, and if this only had 5,000, 10,000 copies that were ever released in the wild, especially in '89, and that too when the copies deleted themselves after playing through, which I'll get to the logistics of that in a little bit. would make this highly unlikely, to be honest. Like, it would make it highly unlikely, but at the same time, it wouldn't disprove it entirely. You could at least have this game exist. Who knows? You could have games in Indonesia similar to this that were released in like '89 on floppy disks that you probably can't discover now because they're so rare at this point, and they might not have a fan base like this where they just disappear. They completely vaporize and go away. They're not backed up, they're not stored anywhere. That is completely gone. Poof. But over here, it could exist, but at the same time, it most likely doesn't. And I'm probably going to stick with most likely it not sticking. Now, the whole story of the game is rather morbid. Again, it captures sort of that feeling of Silent Hill. And one thing I do have to say about the story that I really did enjoy is that it really focused on a message or a theme that it was really trying to convey across, and that was the fact that there was definitely some screwed up things happening at this coal facility. People were being tortured, and as you slowly progressed through the story, through this game, it just dawned on you that it was just going morbid and morbid and morbid until the very end where things end. And when it ends, it truly does end. The company clearly links it to us living as human beings anyways. We don't reverse life, we don't get it back. Once it happens, and that's what Killswitch brings across. In a morbid message, but a message that attributes it to where it was originating from, which was the Soviet Union at the time. Now, the technicality of this existing is a little interesting. Now, as far as I know, in '89, CD-ROMs wouldn't really be the most common form of transmitting the stuff, especially for a game so light. It would most likely be spread across on floppy disks. And that's where I guess it could make sense, because by 1982, we had initially seen the first signs of something that we would call a boot sector virus nowadays. Essentially, for those of you who don't know, during the Apple II era of computing, there was a virus called Elk Cloner, which, if this virus was ever attached to any sort of a game and it was set to play a certain time, for example, let's say the 40th time, right, that the game was ever launched, the virus would release itself. And so instead of actually launching normally, it would launch using a special type of screen. Basically, for this, it would be a poem. The Elk Cloner poem, I guess you could say. And basically, if the computer ever booted from that infected floppy disk, it would copy itself into the computer's memory. And so the next time, if you ever put an uninfected disk into the Apple II system or something, the entire DOS, the entire disk operating system, with the boot sector virus Elk Cloner specifically, would be copied to that disk. And so therefore, because of that, it would spread from disk to disk to disk, and over time it would multiply its infection rate and it would go everywhere. Now, the way it would really rewrite itself was that it wrote this signature bit, or byte, sorry, to the disk directory, basically telling that it would be infected or it wouldn't be infected, things like that. Now, as far as I've read into that virus, it never really caused any deliberate harm as far as anything was claimed on it. But the point is not about the Elk virus specifically. It's not about boot sector viruses. What I'm trying to make a point here is that if this was real, then this would sort of be the technological, it would sort of be the way that it would be technically feasible to an extent, you know what I mean? If it would spread like that, or if it would have a certain byte in it that said, oh, if something happened over here, something messed up, we're going to completely wipe this floppy disk. Or if the whole point was to not clone the disk particularly, this would be a copy protection method. Could it have worked? It most likely could. And the problem with that is that if we had these floppy disks today, obviously you could clone the floppy disk across numerous different partitions, numerous little files spread across your computer. It would be very easy, very effective to pull off. But the problem is, for something released in the 80s, late 80s even, and in such a limited run, having a unopened, sealed copy to this nowadays would be technically unfeasible. For example, at the end of the story, somebody bought a cartridge for $733,000 US, and if they're crying at the end, I think they're crying more so on the fact that they spent $750,000 on a game that, frankly, would completely delete itself after one entire run. I think there's probably nothing incredibly traumatic that might have happened, to the point where I think Yamamoto was really crying because of the game, more so on the fact that that's $750,000 burnt on a on a one limited time creepypasta game. Again, this is just simply a story, nothing more than that. I don't think this ever really accounts for any real world events. But if it does, then I guess that's kind of scary, shocking that somebody's going to spend that much money on a one-run game. But hey, you know what? Whatever floats your boat, right? But the thing is, whether it's technically feasible or not, is a question, but one thing that I think we can all agree on is that this story definitely does bring its originality out completely, and it's definitely far more original than a lot of other gaming creepypastas. You know, instead of having some demonic forces, you could sort of see that hinted at to an extent if you really perceived it in that mindset. But what I think we can really appreciate is the story took an entirely original turn for itself. It created elements completely original to itself, such as Carvina Corporation and things like that, Killswitch, for example, the way it played out, the descriptions, the entire story touching on a political side of the Soviet Union that I think most of us look at, but since we weren't ever there, most of us, that we don't know or we don't comprehend it fully the way that the author here does. Now, it's a little morbid look on it, but sometimes the world can be a lot more morbid than we ever hoped for. Now, is Killswitch real? I think I'm always going to be asking that question to myself. I don't think it is, but hey, maybe it might show up. Maybe it might show up for about $1 million US, and if somebody has that money, please purchase it if you so feel, and definitely copy that disc, because I think if it's one thing that creepypastas like this do right, is keeping curiosity afloat. And I'm curious to see what happens at the end of the other chapter that never was finished. Again, I wonder if you are too as well, and that's where I would like to ask what you would rate this and what you would change about the story in the comment section below. And for this specifically, what do you think happens at the end of that playthrough? Let me know. I'd like to read it. But this has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. This has been Killswitch, part of Creepypastas. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it if you dislike it. This is me, Mutahar, and I am out.